Hello and welcome to another Zoho tutorial video here from Zenatta Consulting. My name is Tyler Colts, and in this video, we're going to be walking through the three first things that I do every time that I jump into a new CRM for a client that we are working with. So these are pretty basic items, but they can make a big difference in the usability of the system for your users. Before we jump in, I do want to ask, if you find this video useful, please be sure to like and subscribe down below, as that really helps us out. And if you have any feedback or questions, please leave that in the comments section as well, as we do try to read and respond to each and every one of those on our weekly podcast, the CRM Zen Show. So without any further ado, let us jump into the walkthrough. Alrighty, so before we actually jump into the system, I do want to give a quick overview of what these three items are that we like to cover each time that we jump into the system. So item number one is removing unnecessary modules. When you first spin up the CRM, there is just a ton of modules that come out of the box. And the reality is you probably don't need most of them for a V1 of your CRM. So removing them just helps the team stay focused on things that actually matter within the CRM. Item number two is going to be to clean up the layouts of the core records that you're using. So within CRM, when you first spin up an account and open up, let's say like a lead record, all of the fields are essentially in one big box. And we always like to split those out and make the record much more legible for a user. And then item number three is to create a basic user profile. So this gets into some of the security settings in the CRM, and out of the box, Zoho CRM comes with an administrator and standard profile. We at Zenatta think that standard profile is way overkill for a normal user. So we like to go through and create kind of like a basic user profile instead. So with that, with our three items kind of listed out here, I think we are ready to jump into the CRM and actually walk through how to get each of those done. Okay, so now we've got our demo account pulled up here of a CRM, and we'll see up across the top the list of modules, right? So home, leads, contacts, accounts, etc. As you look through here, you might see ones that don't really apply for you, right? So something like services, right? Maybe you don't care about that. Vendors, price books, cases, solutions, forecasts, right? It's just module after module after module. And for a lot of people, when they get into the system, it's like, look, I'm trying to put my leads in here, trying to store my contacts, my accounts. I want to track some deals and some tasks about those deals, but not all of these things always apply. So to actually start removing these modules, we'll go into settings in the top right, little cog. We'll go into our modules and fields. And here is where we can actually start to determine what modules are going to be necessary. So step one, right, if you are kind of like the CRM admin, right, is turning off the modules that you're not going to use at all. Right. So if I go through here and I start to look at this, maybe it's like, okay, timesheets, I'm not going to use that. We're not using Zoho projects. Maybe we don't run any Google ads, so I'm going to remove those. I'm just going to kind of get rid of a bunch of these here. Solutions, cases, price books, vendors. You might look at this and go, you know what, like we're not really going to track products in here. I'm going to leave that on for now. But as you see with this list is as I remove them, I can always bring them back by going back to organize modules and just checking the box. So for me, I use kind of a big buzzsaw here. I'm okay with removing something and then deciding later, you know what, we are actually going to use cases. So let's put that back into the system. The trick is just to eliminate some of the noise as you start to define what you need out of the system. So that's kind of the way to remove them all together. If you want to be a little bit more specific and maybe remove certain modules, but only for certain user types, that's where we'll get into the permissions. So here, maybe you want to keep the analytics module, but you don't really want users to have access to the reports that you're going to pull there. Like you want them logging in, calling leads, right? They don't need to worry about how they're tracking against other people. You can actually come in per each module and remove additional users. So maybe only administrators should have access to analytics. So I can go ahead and just remove that here. Again, as an admin user, it's kind of more okay for you to see things that you're not going to use because you kind of have a plan, you know what you're looking to use the system for. But for the basic users in the system, it's really important to only show them things that are relevant for them, right? They don't want to see forecasts if when they click on it and open it, the data doesn't mean anything to them, right? So it's really important to try to cut out as much of the noise as possible by removing unnecessary modules. Now, the last way here that you can kind of adjust your view and adjust what shows up is using what's called a tab group, right? So I give this a refresh and we'll see that now we have significantly less of these modules up across the top. I mean, there's probably even more that we could remove, right? But right now we're going to keep it simple and just, kick out those ones that we've already gotten rid of. And then now kind of option number 2 for showing and hiding modules more specifically is to use tab groups. And so a tab group is basically a way to select just certain modules that are going to show up. So I'm going to add a new tab group. I'm going to pull in like just the good stuff and I'm going to call it core modules. And so like the core modules here, as we would probably define them in CRM, are like leads, contacts, accounts, deals, and let's say activities. And so now that I've added this core modules tab group up here in the top left, we now have that as an option, right? And it's cut out a lot of those modules that just aren't necessary. Again, kind of based on what we've specified here in our tab group. So again, just to recap that, you've got kind of 3 ways to show and hide modules. The first one is by removing them from the system altogether via this organize modules section. You can also hide and show them based on module permissions on a profile level. And then last but not least, you can create a tab group, which is kind of a user-driven choice. So you're not locking them out, but you're giving them an easy way to reduce some of the noise there up at the top of the page. And so with that, I think next we'll go ahead and jump into customizing our record layouts. Alrighty, so to customize our layouts, I'm going to show this on one module, but you can use your imagination. Obviously, the same thing will apply for the rest. So here I'm going into settings again in the top right. I'm going to go into modules and fields. And let's say we want to customize the leads module, right? Because leads, we really don't want to have information in there that isn't necessary. And we want to make sure that when people open up that record, information that is necessary is organized well in a way that makes sense for the user. So I'm going to go ahead here before we jump into the configuration. I'm going to open up a just demo lead in here that's in our CRM. Let's grab any of these, demo records. And what we'll see when we open this up is that pretty much every field about the lead is just dumped into one section. Lead information, right? It stores their name, it stores the company, the annual revenue of the company, the email, the phone number. And if we look through this, there's really no particular order and reason for like why these fields are in the particular places that they're in, right? And so the reality is like a user can absolutely get through this lead, right? They can use this, but we're making it a lot harder on them than it needs to be by not organizing the fields into reasonable sections. So over inside of our settings, we're going to go into leads here, and we'll go into our standard layout. And now we're essentially on the page that allows us to configure what's going to show up here, right? So we'll see, here's an actual lead, and then here's the configuration of that lead within the, back end of the system. So there's a few things that we like to do at Zenatta to customize and, simplify these layouts. The first thing I always do is I add a new section and I call it record information. And I'll generally do this for every module, and it's a very similar looking section. And really what I do here is I dump certain system fields that we don't need to look at all the time, but that we definitely need to have, right? So we need to know their creation date. We need to know when they were modified, right? We need to know if there's an email opt-out that came from campaigns or something in the like. Currency is just a required field if you have books integrated, so we'll put that up there as well. Exchange rate, if you have multi-currency, you can't get rid of. And so I'm basically starting to parse out some of this data that the user doesn't work with, right? The user never touches created by, but originally when we open the system, it's the first thing we see on the page, right? Is this created time. And so I want to make sure that we're adjusting things to encourage the user to look at the fields that matter. So, I'll grab lead source in here as well. If you do want the sales reps to have context on where the lead came from, you could leave that, but I normally will put it in record information. And then I like to put that all the way at the bottom, right? Because again, we need this data. We don't want to delete it, but we don't really care about it when we're a sales rep wanting to call a lead. Now, section number 2 that I'll normally add is for the account or company information. This is where I think the default layout really is most painful to use, is that, now that we've removed those record informations, you see a mix of info about the person and like their contact details, as well as information about the company that they work for, right? And so again, this is all preference, but this is just one way that you can go about doing this. I'll drop in, company, annual revenue, oftentimes the industry, right? Because that industry applies to a company, not a person. If you got another lead later, you could assume that that industry is the same if they're at the same company. I'll pull out number of employees, I'll pull out website, right? And I'll create something that makes sense to me, which is a section containing all of the company info. And if I wanted to put in like new fields, additional fields, like let's say you had, you wanted to know annual spending, annual SaaS spending, right? You can always add that as a field here, set it up to convert to the account, right? And then just drop it into that section. Now, the last one that I will normally create, and not everybody does it this way as well, so I'll highlight that, is I like to pull out contact information separately from this like top level lead information. So I'll pull out like email, phone, maybe secondary email, Skype ID. Nobody uses Skype, and this is still default. So most of the time I will just remove it, right? We just don't care about Skype. We will get rid of Twitter while we're at it. Rating, I'll just pull down here into the account section. And then from there, now we're looking at a layout that makes a lot more sense, right? So when I look up at the top here, we see who the sales rep is that's working this, right? The owner. We see their name and we see that lead status, right? Some people will do this as well, right? They'll bring up the company. Maybe we want to see that as like a top level piece of information, and that's totally fine. This honestly right here is how a lot of leads end up being set up, right? So that we're able to just grab that quick information. Now I'll go ahead and save this, and it's not going to apply yet. So it gives us a chance to jump back to our example lead. So we've got kind of our before here where everything is just in a big block, really no rhyme or reason to why these fields are where they are. Now, when I give it a refresh, I think we can agree, though there's always a bit of preference about where things should go, this layout definitely makes a lot more sense, right? As like a quick view of what's going on with the record, right? We've got name, we've got company, status right up there at the top, contact information all grouped up so we know how to get in touch with them. Account information separated out so they're able to see what's specific to the lead and what's specific to the company. And then all of that junk here that no one really needs to touch, let's get it out of the way, right? Let's put it at the bottom of the record and make sure that it is not in the way of a user who really just wants to open this lead, get a top down, and place a call. And so again, we're not going to go module by module, but in essence, we will do a similar type of layout for every single one of these just to make sure that they are usable and that they make sense. Because when a user logs into the system for the first time and they open up a contact record that maybe has been imported, right, from your old CRM, and everything is just in a big block, right? The eyes glaze over, they're seeing things they don't care about, and they're not going to be very excited to use the system. And so with that, I think that wraps up our organization section here around customizing our layouts. And with that, we will jump into our third item that we like to do for every new CRM, which is the creation of what we call a basic user profile. Alrighty, and now we can get on into our third item here. So our third item, the creation of the basic user, we're going to jump into settings, and then we're going to go into security control. Right. And I'll do a very quick overview of these. We actually do have a full video breakdown of how profiles and roles work that we'll go ahead and link here and in the description. So if you need a really detailed breakdown, I'd highly recommend going and checking out that video. It should be really helpful for you if you're like a new CRM admin. So here we're just going to talk about profiles. The 30-second synopsis on roles is that they determine who can see what data based on ownership via like a hierarchy. So if a manager owns a lead, maybe other managers can't see it, but the CEO can because they're above them in the hierarchy. That stuff, it all gets nitty gritty, and you want to determine it and hopefully make it match your org chart as well as you can. But the big thing that we always do is create a new profile. So out of the gate, right, we've got administrator and standard, and obviously administrator is going to have permissions over everything in the system. So if we just do like a quick scroll through on administrator, right, we can automatically see all records, we can create, we can edit, we can delete, right? We can mass import and export, right? So an administrator can export all of the leads into a spreadsheet and download it, which is a big deal. We can mass delete, mass email, change ownership of records, right? All things that you would imagine that a administrator can do. Right. The tail end of it, of course, it gets more into configuration, right? We can create automated systems. We can run the migration tool and pull all the data out. And then last but not least, we can actually create API connections, which give kind of full access to anything in the system. So now, keeping that in mind, that the administrator profile can touch all records, create all automations, run third-party integrations. Let's now look at the standard profile and see what's different. Now, keeping in mind that we cannot modify the permissions on this at a super deep level on anything other than these top level module permissions. So with standard, I could say, okay, standard cannot view, create, or edit leads, right? I can do some customization here in terms of what they can do to records that show up for them. But what you'll find is that here, if we look at this, it's a system-defined profile, and we cannot modify permissions other than basic. So what this means is that any record that a standard user has access to, they can export, right? Any record that they have access to, they can mass email, right? And so they can mass update, they can change owners, right? They can do most things that really only an admin, you would imagine, would be able to do. Right? A standard user can go up and set up an automated email workflow on the back end, and we can't turn that off, right? They can create API connections, which again, for the nerds who are watching, that's tons of access to the system. Most button presses have an API. And so obviously we don't assume that our users are going to be bad actors, but as system administrators, we're obligated to make sure that we've enforced, standardized security rules. And so here, the quickest way to create a basic profile is to clone this record. I'll call this basic. And so we're basing it off of standard. And now, I'm not going to worry about these things up at the top. I'm okay with the user. Maybe I don't want them to delete. Maybe I'll get rid of that. And if they need to delete something, right, they can talk to an administrator of the system. So get rid of some of those things here, right? We can do those types of customizations. The big thing here, and I'm going to go through each of these just to make sure, because these are all things that you need to do for a standard user. I do not allow them to import, right? If a sales rep who is just using the system to call their leads, if they come up with a big spreadsheet of leads, that should go through a manager, right? We need to make sure that those leads aren't already in the system, right? That another sales rep isn't on stage 5 with that lead, right? We need process controls around any types of big imports. Exports, obviously the same, right? We want to trust our employees, but you never know, right? A disgruntled employee, you don't want them to be able to walk with a list of 3,000 leads, right? There's a lot of money sitting in that list. Email permissions, I like to turn off the ability to delete an email. This is like if they sent something from the CRM and they don't want to be accountable for it, right? I want to make sure that they can't just go and delete that. I will generally turn off the ability to mass delete. I will turn off the ability to change owner, right? Like if I assign you a lead and you don't want to work it, you shouldn't just be able to move it to somebody else, right? These are all things that should require an escalation in the system and should not just be done by a level 1 user. I'll let them convert, mass convert. Sharing, this is like a determination on your side. It depends on if sales reps work together. I'll turn it off for now, assuming that you really want to lock things down. Other permissions, print view, I turn this off because it's not helpful and people get lost trying to use it. Sheet view allows for mass updates. So if I don't want people to be able to mass delete, I can't have them using sheet view because it gives them just too many permissions to those data. Find and merge, again, this is a decision. If a basic user can only see their own leads, those are the only ones that are going to come up in a find and merge. So sometimes I'll leave that on, if you have conscientious sales reps who want to make sure they don't have duplicate records, that can be helpful. Manage custom views, turn this off. Sales reps don't realize this, but when they change one for themselves, they are changing it for everybody. So these should generally go through a manager user. Now, when it comes to setup permissions, I wish you could just turn them all off here, but unfortunately, there are a couple that we have to turn on. So I leave this on. And what I do is I come in and I turn off BCC Dropbox. We do need to leave email integration on. We've got a separate video about how to set this up, but it does need to be activated. I will generally turn off the ability to manage templates. Again, this is to your discretion. I turn off automation, case escalation, assignment rules. I don't have to read them off. I turn all of these things off. None of these are things that a sales rep needs to use. I'll even turn data enrichment off, prediction off. Some of these with Zia, you might want to allow them to use, but again, you just need to make sure that they're not getting kind of lost in the various features. Want to make sure that they're able to use the system succinctly and cleanly. Phone bridge, you have to leave it on so that they're able to connect their own phone line if you do have like Ring Central, something like that. Finance, I'll leave on. Google Contact and Calendar, this is a determination for you. I'll leave this on because I have this synced and my team uses it. Some of the Microsoft plugins I think are fine. And then the big one here, developer permissions. Nobody but admins and developers need that permission. There's just no reason that a sales rep needs to set up an OAuth authenticated API connection to the CRM. That is just not necessary, and you're taking a lot of risk if you leave it on. So again, that was kind of a wordy way to go through this, but hopefully helpful. That again, we've just seen a lot of people who end up with 30, 40 sales reps in this standard profile that they just have so much access in the system. And so we always like to set this up in one of our first actions working with a new client. And so with that, I think we've covered those 3 core things that we want to do every single time we spin up a new CRM, starting with, removing and organizing our modules, cleaning up our record layouts, and then creating a basic user profile that has a much more sane level of access to the CRM. With that, I think we can wrap up for today. If you did find this video useful, please be sure to like and subscribe down below, as that really does help us out, and it'll make sure that future videos of ours pop into your feed via the voodoo of the YouTube algorithm. And if you do have any feedback or questions, please leave those in the comment section below, as we do try to read and respond to each and every one of those on our weekly podcast, the CRM Zen Show. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you next time.